The trial chamber existed in a place where space folded into itself. Giant walls of crystal stretched in impossible directions, reflecting starlight from 1,000 different systems. Representatives from 47 species sat in floating seats arranged in circles that rose toward a ceiling that wasn't really there. At the center, raised above everyone else, High Arbiter Sal Theron reviewed the evidence against humanity for what he thought would be the last time. His claws tapped against the Judgment Stone, a piece of compressed star matter that recorded every decision made in this chamber for the past 11,000 years. The sound echoed through the vast space, and every representative fell silent. Sal Theron's scales, which usually glowed with warm orange light, had turned a dull red. He was angry, and everyone knew it. The Flamekeepers rarely showed emotion, but this case had tested even his legendary patience. Humanity stood accused of breaking the sacred technology accords for the third time in 50 years. The charges were specific and damning. Weapons development beyond approved parameters, military shipbuilding without proper authorization, research into prohibited energy systems. The evidence came from multiple sources, verified by independent investigators, and left no room for doubt. Earth's diplomatic team had tried every legal argument they could think of, but the facts remained unchanged. The prosecutor representing the Hive Collective stepped forward. Her name was Click Pattern that humans couldn't pronounce, so everyone called her Advocate 7. Her compound eyes reflected the chamber's light as she addressed Sal Theron directly. She spoke in the common tongue, her voice carrying the mechanical precision her species was known for. High Arbiter, the evidence requires no further review. Humanity has violated 17 specific clauses of the technology accords. They have shown no remorse and offered no acceptable justification. The Hive Collective moves for immediate sentencing. We recommend confinement to their home system for 500 standard years, with all spacefaring privileges revoked. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. 500 years was a harsh sentence, but not unprecedented. The Flamekeepers had handed down similar punishments to 3 other species in the past 2 millennia. None of those species had ever recovered their former status in galactic society. Sal Theron looked down at the human delegation. They sat in a small group, 12 individuals who represented an entire planet of 10 billion souls. Their lead diplomat, a woman named Patricia Cole, stared back at him with defiant eyes. She had fought hard for her people, but she knew the verdict was already decided. The Flamekeepers never changed their minds once the evidence was presented. Does the defense have any final statements before I render judgment? Sal Theron's voice carried the weight of 3,000 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had judged hundreds of cases involving violations of galactic law. This should have been routine. Patricia stood slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. High Arbiter, we have nothing new to add. Humanity accepts responsibility for our actions. We only ask that you consider our reasons, even if you cannot accept them as legal justification. Sal Theron nodded. He had read humanity's defense documents. They claimed they needed advanced weapons for self-defense. They argued that the galaxy was more dangerous than the Council admitted. They suggested that the technology accords left peaceful species vulnerable to threats the Council couldn't or wouldn't address. All of it was legally irrelevant, but Sal Theron understood their fear. Fear made species do foolish things. He raised the Judgment Stone, ready to pronounce the verdict that would end Earth's brief time as a spacefaring civilization. Then the chamber doors opened. No one had called for a recess. No one had requested permission to enter. The doors simply opened, powered by override codes that only Council security possessed in emergency situations. Every head turned to see who would dare interrupt a Flamekeeper's judgment. An old man walked in alone. He moved slowly, using a walking stick carved from earthwood. His hair was white, his face marked with deep lines that spoke of a hard life. He wore a military jacket covered in medals and insignia that no one in the chamber recognized. In his other hand, he carried a briefcase that looked older than he did. Advocate 7's mandibles clicked in irritation. High Arbiter, this is highly irregular. The defense has already rested. No additional witnesses were registered. The old man ignored her and continued walking toward the center of the chamber. Guards moved to intercept him, but Sal Theron raised a claw to stop them. Something about this human interested him. The man showed no fear, no nervousness. He walked like someone who had seen things that would break most beings. Patricia Cole looked as confused as everyone else. She leaned over to whisper to another member of her delegation, but the old man was already speaking. "Hi, Arbiter. My name is Walter Hayes. I apologize for the interruption, but I have evidence that this court needs to see before rendering judgment." His voice was rough, like gravel being ground together but clear enough to carry through the chamber. Saltheron studied him carefully. "The evidence has been reviewed, human. The defense had ample opportunity to present all relevant materials." Walter nodded. "Yes, sir. But the defense didn't know about this evidence. Neither did the prosecution. Neither did anyone in this chamber except maybe you, if you've read certain files in the Forbidden Archives." A ripple of shock went through the assembled representatives. The Forbidden Archives were exactly that, forbidden. They contained historical records considered too dangerous or too sensitive for general access. Only the Flamekeepers and the highest levels of council leadership could view them, and even then only with specific authorization. Advocate 7 made a sharp clicking sound. "Hi, Arbiter. This is clearly a delaying tactic. The human is making baseless claims about classified materials he cannot possibly have accessed." Walter turned to look at her. His eyes were tired but sharp. "I'm not talking about accessing your archives, ma'am. I'm talking about events that got recorded there without humanity's knowledge or permission. Events that happened before Earth even knew the Galactic Council existed." Saltheron felt something he rarely experienced, curiosity mixed with unease. He had lived for 3,000 years and thought he had seen every trick, every last-minute revelation, every desperate attempt to avoid justice. But this felt different. "Explain yourself, Walter Hayes. You have 5 minutes." Walter set his briefcase down and opened it carefully. Inside, something glowed with a soft blue light. He pulled out a metallic sphere about the size of a human fist. Its surface was covered in markings that looked like circuit patterns but moved and shifted like living things. "This is a navigation core from a ship called Endeavor's Hope. It was built in Earth year 2087, launched in 2088, and destroyed in 2089 during a battle that your council watched happen and then pretended never occurred." Walter held the sphere up so everyone could see it. "This core contains complete records of that battle, including footage, communications logs, and sensor data. It also contains records of what happened after the battle, when council representatives visited Earth and made us an offer we were too exhausted to refuse." The chamber erupted into noise. Representatives shouted questions, accusations, demands for explanation. Advocate 7 called for guards to remove Walter immediately. Patricia Cole sat frozen, staring at Walter as if she had never seen him before. Saltheron remained silent, studying the sphere in Walter's hand. Something about it triggered a memory, a fragment of information he had glimpsed decades ago while reviewing historical records, a classified note about an incident in a remote sector, a note that had been marked with the highest security clearance and flagged for permanent sealing. He raised both claws, and silence fell instantly. When a Flamekeeper demanded attention, every species listened. "Activate your device, Walter Hayes. Show us what you believe changes the nature of this trial." Walter placed the sphere on the floor in front of him. It began to hum, a sound that grew from barely audible to something felt in the bones rather than heard. Light spilled from it, forming shapes in the air above the chamber floor. The shapes became clearer, solidifying into a 3-dimensional projection that filled the space between Walter and Saltheron's judgment seat. Earth hung in the darkness of space, blue and green and beautiful, but something was wrong with the image. Hundreds of objects surrounded the planet, too large to be satellites, too numerous to be space stations. They were ships crewed by galactic standards, covered in weapon systems that stuck out at odd angles. In 2085, Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Network detected gravitational anomalies at the edge of our solar system. Walter began. His voice had changed, becoming harder, more formal. This was a military briefing, not a courtroom speech. Our scientists couldn't explain what they were seeing. The math didn't work. Space was bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. The projection shifted, zooming out from Earth to show the solar system's outer edge. Dark shapes appeared, massive objects that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with purpose, accelerating toward the inner planets. We sent probes. They never came back. We sent a manned reconnaissance ship. It transmitted for 47 seconds before the signal died. Walter's jaw tightened. The last thing it sent was footage of something that still gives me nightmares. The projection showed what the reconnaissance ship had seen. Organic shapes the size of mountains covered in what looked like thousands of reaching limbs. They pulsed with sickly light, and where they moved, space itself seemed to tear. One of the creatures opened something that might have been a mouth, revealing layers of teeth made from compressed matter. Advocate 7 made a sound like breaking glass. Several other representatives gasped or made their species equivalent of distressed noises. Southeron leaned forward, his scales darkening to deep crimson. "The Devourers," he said quietly. Walter nodded. "We didn't know that name then. We just called them the enemy. Our linguists tried every method of communication they could think of. The things didn't respond. They just kept coming straight toward Earth." The projection changed again, showing what looked like a war room somewhere underground. Humans in military uniforms stood around tables covered in maps and data displays. They looked exhausted, arguing with each other in what was clearly a heated debate. Every nation on Earth came together for the first time in our history. We pooled our resources, our technology, our industrial capacity. We had 18 months before those things would reach Earth. 18 months to build a fleet that could stop them. Walter's voice carried an edge of old pain. We didn't know we were breaking galactic law. We didn't know the Galactic Council existed. We just knew that if we didn't fight, humanity would cease to exist. The projection showed Earth's orbital space transforming. Construction yards appeared, massive structures being assembled at speeds that should have been impossible. Ships took shape, hundreds of them, each one unique because humanity was inventing spaceship design from scratch. Patricia Cole stood up slowly from her seat. "Walter, I've never heard of any of this. There's nothing in Earth's historical records about—" "Because we were ordered to erase it," Walter interrupted. "But I'm getting ahead of myself." The projection shifted to show the battle. Humanity's makeshift fleet met the Devourers at Jupiter's orbit. The footage was shaky, recorded from multiple ships at once, creating a chaotic picture of the engagement. Human vessels fired weapons that looked primitive but effective: nuclear missiles, kinetic impactors moving at impossible speeds, experimental energy beams that tore through space. The Devourers fought back with weapons that defied physics. They warped space to crush ships, used gravity as a blade, generated fields that turned matter into energy. Human ships died by the dozens, exploding in brief flashes of light. But for every human vessel destroyed, the fleet adapted. They changed tactics, modified their weapons mid-battle, coordinated in ways that surprised even themselves. Southeron watched in silence. His 3,000 years of experience told him what he was seeing shouldn't be possible. The Devourers were older than most galactic civilizations. They had destroyed countless species. The Flamekeepers themselves had barely survived an encounter with them 5 million years ago. Yet here were humans, a species that had just learned to leave their planet, fighting them to a standstill. The battle lasted for 3 weeks. The projection showed human ships being rebuilt in orbit even as the fighting continued. Crews worked without sleep, replacing destroyed vessels faster than the Devourers could eliminate them. New weapons appeared, each generation more devastating than the last. Humanity threw everything they had into the fight: their science, their industry, their lives. "We lost 42,000 people in that battle," Walter said quietly. 42,000 volunteers who knew they probably wouldn't come home. The youngest was 19. The oldest was 71. The projection showed the final phase of the battle. A dozen human ships broke through the Devourer formation, targeting what sensor analysis suggested were command organisms. They released weapons that Walter didn't name, but Southeron recognized them immediately. Singularity bombs, devices that created temporary black holes, technology so dangerous that 3 different galactic civilizations had destroyed themselves trying to weaponize it. The Devourers fell back. Not defeated, but damaged enough to retreat. They withdrew to the edge of the solar system and then vanished, leaving behind wreckage and radiation that would contaminate Jupiter's orbit for centuries. "We won," Walter said. "Barely, but we won." Earth was safe. Humanity had survived its first contact with hostile alien life. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was bitter. "That's when your council showed up." The projection changed to show a sleek ship entering Earth's orbit. It was beautiful, all smooth curves and elegant design. Nothing like humanity's brutal, functional warships. The contrast was stark and deliberate. A diplomatic team made contact with our leadership 3 days after the battle ended. They explained that the Galactic Council had been monitoring the situation. They told us about galactic law, about the technology accords, about the penalties for violations. Walter looked directly at Saltheron. They explained that we had broken approximately 47 different laws during the battle. Laws we didn't know existed because no one had ever contacted us before. Advocate 7 spoke up, her voice sharp. If this is true, it was clearly an emergency situation. The council would have made allowances. No, Walter cut her off. They didn't. Your representatives made it very clear. We had developed prohibited weapons. We had engaged in unauthorized military action. We had used technology that was banned under the Sacred Technology Accords. The fact that we did it to save ourselves didn't matter under galactic law. The projection showed a meeting between human leaders and council diplomats. The humans looked shell-shocked, still wearing uniforms stained with the evidence of weeks of continuous battle. The diplomats looked calm, professional, completely untouched by what had just happened. But they had a problem, Walter continued. If they prosecuted us then, they'd have to explain why the Devourers had returned. The council had told everyone in the galaxy that the Devourers were extinct, destroyed millions of years ago. Admitting they were wrong would cause panic. Worse, they'd have to explain why their sensor networks didn't detect the threat and why they didn't send help. Saltheron's claws scraped against the judgment stone. He remembered now fully. The sealed report. The classified order. The decision made at the highest levels of council leadership. So they made us a deal, Walter said. Destroy all evidence of the battle. Dismantle our military fleet. Submit to gradual integration into galactic society under council supervision. In exchange, Earth would be welcomed as a member species, and no one would ever know about the Devourers. The projection showed human ships being cut apart in orbit, weapons being loaded onto transport vessels and flown into the sun, construction yards being dismantled piece by piece, and through it all humans working with the blank expressions of people who had just had their greatest achievement erased. We agreed because we were tired, because we wanted to believe the galaxy was safe, because we thought the council knew what they were doing. Walter picked up the sphere and the projection disappeared. But some of us kept records. Some of us didn't trust the council's promises, and some of us knew that if the Devourers came once, they'd come again. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. So here's what you need to understand before the High Arbiter passes judgment. Yes, humanity violated the technology accords. Yes, we built weapons we shouldn't have. Yes, we kept secrets. But we did it because your council lied to us. You took away our ability to defend ourselves and then left us vulnerable to the very threat you claimed didn't exist. Saltheron sat motionless, processing what he had seen. Everything Walter said matched the fragments in the forbidden archives. The dates aligned. The details were consistent. And most damningly, it explained questions that had bothered him for decades about gaps in council security reports from that era. This evidence changes nothing legally, Advocate 7 said. But her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Humanity still broke the law. You're right, Walter agreed. We did, and maybe we deserve punishment. But before you decide, there's one more thing you need to know. He looked at Saltheron. The Devourers are coming back. Silence crashed through the chamber like a physical force. Representatives froze in their seats. Advocate 7's mandibles stopped clicking mid-motion. Even the ever-present hum of the chamber's technology seemed to fade. Only Saltheron moved, his ancient eyes narrowing as he studied Walter's face for any sign of deception. Explain, the High Arbiter commanded. Walter reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a data tablet. Its design was human, blocky and functional compared to the elegant curves of galactic technology. He activated it and began transferring information to the chamber's main display system. Numbers and graphs filled the air, forming patterns that meant nothing to most observers but everything to those trained in deep space analysis. After the first battle, we didn't just hide ships. We built a monitoring network, thousands of sensor stations positioned beyond council space, in the gaps between your detection grids. We've been watching the places you don't look. Walter highlighted several data streams. 3 years ago, we started detecting the same gravitational signatures we saw in 2085. Last year, they increased in frequency and intensity. 6 months ago, we confirmed what we feared. The Devourers are gathering at the edge of the galaxy. A representative from the Gentle Walkers, a species known for their diplomatic nature, spoke up. Her voice carried a tremor that betrayed her fear. You claim to have detected an invasion fleet beyond council space? Why didn't you report this through proper channels? Because the last time we reported anything about the Devourers, we were told to forget it ever happened, Walter said flatly. We didn't think the Council would listen. We thought you'd accuse us of making it up to justify our weapons development, which, based on the last 3 days of this trial, seems like we were right. Saltheron activated his access to the Forbidden Archives, pulling up historical data on Devourer behavior. The patterns matched. The last time they had attacked in force 5 million years ago, they had followed the same approach. Small probing attacks first, testing defenses. Then a withdrawal period lasting decades or centuries while they gathered strength. Finally, a massive assault that nearly wiped out galactic civilization. How many? Saltheron asked. He already knew the answer would be bad. Our best estimate is between 3,000 and 5,000 Devourer bioships, with support organisms numbering in the tens of thousands. They're massing in 3 different staging areas, preparing for a coordinated strike. Walter switched the display to show a star map with 3 red zones marked. Based on their current movement patterns, they'll reach Council space in approximately 2 standard years. Advocate 7 recovered her composure first. High Arbiter, this is clearly a fabrication. The Devourers were destroyed millions of years ago. This human is presenting false evidence to avoid justice. Your Council documented our battle with them 50 years ago, Walter shot back. Are you claiming that report was false too? That was a minor incursion, a remnant group that somehow survived. With all respect, ma'am, I was there. I fought them. Those weren't remnants. They were scouts. Walter's voice hardened. And scouts don't come alone. They report back. They call for reinforcements. Saltheron began cross-referencing Walter's data with information from the Forbidden Archives. The computational power available to a Flamekeeper was vast, and he used it fully. Historical Devourer movements, energy signatures, gravitational patterns. Everything aligned. Either Walter had somehow accessed the most classified information in galactic history and created an incredibly detailed fake, or he was telling the truth. I need to verify this information independently, Saltheron announced. This trial is suspended pending investigation. High Arbiter, you cannot seriously be considering. Advocate 7 began. I am considering that the extinction of every species in this galaxy is a more pressing concern than punishing treaty violations, Saltheron interrupted. His scales had turned bright orange, the color of alarm and urgent action. If there is even a possibility that this threat is real, we must investigate immediately. He turned to Walter. You will provide complete access to your monitoring network. Council military analysts will examine your data. If you have lied about this, if this is an elaborate deception, I will personally ensure humanity faces the harshest possible sentence. Understood, Walter said calmly. But while your analysts verify what I'm telling you, there's more you need to know about what happened after the Council made us dismantle our fleet. Patricia Cole was on her feet again, looking between Walter and her fellow diplomats in confusion. Walter, I'm Earth's primary representative to the Galactic Council. If what you're saying is true, why wasn't I informed? Why doesn't our government know about this? Your government does know, Walter said gently. Or at least parts of it do. The same parts that authorized the weapon development you've been defending for the last 3 days. Did you really think we were building plasma accelerators and fusion drives because we wanted to break Council law? We were restoring capabilities we already had. The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber. If humanity already possessed advanced weapons technology before the current violations, if they had simply been rebuilding what was taken from them, then the entire legal case shifted. They weren't a primitive species overreaching their development level. They were a military power that had been forcibly disarmed. Saltheron's mind worked through the political complexities. The Council's foundation rested on the principle that advanced technology must be carefully regulated. Species joined the Council by agreeing to limit their military capabilities in exchange for collective security. But that collective security had failed humanity 50 years ago. The Council had watched Earth fight alone, then punished them for surviving. You said you hid ships, Saltheron stated. How many? Walter smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's classified, High Arbiter. But I'll tell you this. When the Devourers come, they're going to find that humanity didn't spend the last 50 years sitting idle. We've been preparing, training, building. We learned a valuable lesson the first time we faced them. What lesson? That we can't rely on anyone but ourselves. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The gentle Walker representative looked stricken. Even Advocate 7 seemed affected, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light in complex patterns that suggested internal conflict. Sal Theron accessed another set of files from the Forbidden Archives, these ones dealing with Earth's industrial capacity and technological development. The official report showed steady but controlled progress, exactly what would be expected from a newly integrated species under Council supervision. But if Walter was telling the truth, those reports were lies. Humanity had been developing military technology in secret for 5 decades. Where? Sal Theron asked. Where did you hide this industrial capacity? Council inspectors have visited Earth regularly. Nothing was detected. Earth isn't the only place in our solar system, High Arbiter. It's just the place you watched. Walter pulled up another display showing humanity's home system. Dozens of locations were marked, from asteroid bases to facilities buried in the ice of distant moons. We learned from the best. The Council taught us how to hide things when you made us erase our victory. We just applied those lessons more broadly. One of the representatives, a member of the Silicon Collective whose species existed as crystalline networks, spoke in a voice like chiming bells. If your species has been violating Council law for 50 years, developing prohibited weapons, building hidden fleets, then you are guilty of far more than the current charges suggest? Yes, Walter agreed simply. We are. And if the Devourers weren't coming, I'd say go ahead and punish us. Lock humanity in our system for 1,000 years. We'd survive. We're good at surviving. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as possible. But they are coming. And when they arrive, you're going to need every ship, every weapon, every soldier who knows how to fight them, because your Council fleets won't be enough. How dare you, Advocate 7 started. How many combat veterans does the Council military have? Walter asked directly. How many of your soldiers have actually fought against an enemy that wanted to exterminate them? How many of your ship captains have experience with anything beyond peacekeeping and anti-piracy operations? The silence that followed was answer enough. The Galactic Council had enjoyed relative peace for millions of years. Their military existed primarily to maintain order within member systems and protect against minor threats. The last major war had been so long ago that it existed only in historical records. Humanity has 42,000 veterans from the first Devourer War still alive, Walter continued. We've been training new generations based on their experience. We've been running combat simulations for 50 years, using data from the original battle. We've been preparing for a war you pretended would never come. Sal Theron felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries, uncertainty about the right course of action. The law was clear. Humanity had violated the sacred technology accords repeatedly and systematically. They deserved punishment under every legal standard the Council upheld. But the law had been created for a galaxy at peace, not a galaxy facing extinction. This trial cannot continue until your claims are verified, Sal Theron announced. Walter Hayes, you will accompany Council analysts to your monitoring stations. Patricia Cole, you will contact Earth's government and request full disclosure of all military capabilities. Representatives of this Council, return to your quarters. We will reconvene when investigation is complete. As the chamber began to empty, Walter remained standing in the center. Sal Theron descended from his judgment seat, using his massive wings to glide down rather than walk. Up close, the size difference between Flamekeeper and human was dramatic. Sal Theron could have crushed Walter with one claw, but the old man didn't flinch. Why did you come forward? Sal Theron asked quietly. His voice meant only for Walter. If humanity has been preparing in secret for decades, why reveal yourself now? You could have let us pass judgment, taken your punishment, and continued preparing in silence. Walter looked up at the ancient dragon judge. Because we're not monsters, High Arbiter. We break rules when we have to. We hide things when we must. But we don't let billions die when we could prevent it. If the Devourers come and the Council isn't prepared, everyone suffers. We wanted to give you a chance to get ready, even if it means exposing ourselves. Your species is either incredibly noble or incredibly foolish. We're human, Walter said with a tired smile. We're usually both. 3 days passed while Council analysts tore through Walter's data. Sal Theron spent those days in his private chambers, reviewing files that hadn't been opened in millions of years. The Forbidden Archives contained records of the last Devourer invasion, stored in formats so old that specialized systems had to be activated just to read them. What he found there turned his understanding of galactic history inside out. The Flamekeepers had survived the ancient war, but barely. Of his species' original population of 3 million, fewer than 10,000 had lived to see the Devourers finally driven back. The weapons used in that war had scarred entire sectors of space. Planets had been reduced to dust. Stars had been deliberately collapsed to create barriers of radiation. The galaxy had nearly died. After the war, the surviving species had made a collective decision. Never again would they allow technology to advance to such destructive levels. The sacred technology accords were created not just as law, but as a promise. A promise that the horrors of that war would never be repeated. Every species that joined the Council agreed to limit their military development, trusting in collective security rather than individual might. It had worked for millions of years. The galaxy had prospered. Art, science, and philosophy flourished. The Devourers became legends, then myths, then forgotten entirely by most species. Only the Flamekeepers and a few other ancient races remembered the truth, and now they were coming back. A notification chimed. The chief analyst assigned to investigate Walter's claims requested immediate meeting. Saltheron authorized entry, and a crystalline collective member materialized in his chamber. Her body was composed of interlocking silicon structures that glowed with internal light, making her thoughts partially visible as patterns of brightness. High Arbiter, we have completed initial analysis of the human monitoring data, she chimed. Her patterns flickered in ways that suggested distress. The signatures are consistent with historical Devourer fleet movements. Cross-referencing with Forbidden Archive records shows 97% correlation. The humans are telling the truth. Saltheron had expected this confirmation, but hearing it stated so plainly still hit him like a physical blow. Force estimates? Conservative estimates suggest minimum of 3,000 primary bioships, each one comparable in size to our largest dreadnoughts. Supporting organisms number in the hundreds of thousands. High Arbiter, this is not a raiding force. This is an extermination fleet. Arrival timeline? 23 standard months, give or take 30 days. They are accelerating faster than historical records suggested was possible. They may have evolved new capabilities. Saltheron dismissed her and sat in silence, processing the information. 23 months to prepare for a war that would decide whether galactic civilization survived. The Council's combined military forces numbered perhaps 15,000 ships, many of them exploratory vessels with minimal combat capability. Against 3,000 Devourers and their support organisms, those numbers meant nothing. His communicator activated. Patricia Cole's face appeared, her expression grim. High Arbiter, Earth's government has authorized me to share classified information regarding our military capabilities. You need to see this. An hour later, Saltheron stood in a secure Council facility, watching footage that should have been impossible. The display showed a shipyard hidden in the Kuiper Belt, far beyond the orbit of Earth's outermost planets. Hundreds of vessels were docked there, undergoing maintenance and upgrades. They were massive, larger than anything humanity was supposed to have. And there were more facilities like this throughout human space. We call them the Ghost Fleet, Patricia explained. She looked tired, as if the weight of this secret had been crushing her. After the Council made us dismantle our original military, we complied with the letter of the law. We destroyed those specific ships, but we kept the blueprints. We kept the knowledge. And in places you weren't watching, we started building again. Another facility appeared on the display, this one carved into an asteroid. Inside, weapons were being manufactured. Saltheron recognized some of them from Walter's battle footage. Singularity torpedoes, plasma lances, kinetic accelerators capable of punching through any known shield. All of them violations of the technology accords. How many ships? Saltheron asked. Patricia hesitated, then answered. 15,000 completed and operational. Another 8,000 in various stages of construction. The number stunned him. Humanity had built a fleet larger than the entire Council military, hidden it successfully for 50 years, and kept it secret even from their own diplomatic corps. The level of organization and deception required was extraordinary. Your government approved this? Saltheron asked. All of Earth's leadership knew? Not exactly. About 30 years ago, certain members of Earth's military and government formed what they called the Defense Initiative. It operated independently, funded through black budgets and off-book resource extraction. Most of Earth's population doesn't know it exists. Until 3 days ago, I didn't know it existed. Southeron understood the implications. A secret military organization, operating for decades without oversight, accumulating enough power to challenge the entire galactic order. Under normal circumstances, this would be grounds for immediate military intervention by the Council. It represented everything the sacred technology accords were designed to prevent, but these weren't normal circumstances. I need to speak with Walter Hayes again, Southeron said. They found Walter in a Council detention facility. Though calling it detention was generous, he had been given comfortable quarters and access to communication systems. When Southeron entered, the old man was reviewing tactical displays, annotating them with notes that looked like they came from actual combat experience. "Hi, Arbiter," Walter greeted him, not standing up. "I assume your analyst confirmed what I told you." "They did. I also received full disclosure from Earth's government about your ghost fleet." Southeron settled his bulk into a position that approximated sitting. "You hid 15,000 warships from Council inspectors for 50 years. Do you understand how serious that is? I understand that if we hadn't, humanity would be defenseless when the Devourers arrive. I understand that the Council's promises of collective security meant nothing when we needed help. I understand that we were given a choice between extinction and survival, and we chose survival, at the cost of breaking every principle the galactic community is built on." Walter finally looked up from his displays. "Hi, Arbiter, I respect your position. I really do. You've lived 3,000 years upholding galactic law. But here's what I learned in my 76 years. Laws are made by people who think they understand how the universe works, and sometimes the universe shows you that you were wrong. The sacred technology accords exist for good reason. The last war nearly destroyed the galaxy, and the next war will definitely destroy it if we're not prepared. Your laws were made for peacetime. We're not in peacetime anymore." Southeron's scales shifted through colors, reflecting his internal struggle. Orange for alarm, red for anger, blue for sadness, finally settling on purple for deep contemplation. "If I knew what verdict to render, I would have done so already." Walter stood up slowly, his joints creaking with age. "Then let me make it simple for you. We're guilty. Every charge the prosecution brought is true. We violated the technology accords. We built prohibited weapons. We hid military assets. We lied to Council inspectors. We deserve punishment under your law. Then why? But punishment can wait until after we're all still alive to care about it." Walter moved to a display showing the approaching Devourer fleet. "Right now you've got a choice. You can uphold your principles and punish humanity, reducing our ability to fight. Or you can set aside your principles temporarily and let us help defend the galaxy we all live in. It is not that simple. It really is. You're just making it complicated, because you've spent 3,000 years believing that law is more important than survival. But I've got news for you, High Arbiter. Dead civilizations don't have laws. They just have ruins." Southeron wanted to argue, to explain the philosophical foundations of galactic law, to make Walter understand why the sacred technology accords were sacred. But he couldn't, because the old human was right. None of it mattered if everyone was dead. "If I allow humanity to maintain your fleet, to use your prohibited weapons, I will be violating my oaths as a flamekeeper. I will be betraying millions of years of tradition." "Yes," Walter agreed. "You will. And every living being in this galaxy will be grateful for it, even if they never know what you sacrificed." A message arrived in Southeron's neural interface. The Council's military command had completed their assessment of the Devourer threat. They estimated that Council forces had a 12% chance of victory using conventional assets. With humanity's ghost fleet added to the equation, chances improved to 43%. Still not good, but infinitely better than extinction. "There is another consideration," Southeron said. "If I grant humanity special dispensation to use prohibited technology, other species will demand the same privileges. The entire structure of galactic law could collapse." "Maybe it should," Walter said quietly. "Maybe laws that leave you defenseless against extinction aren't worth keeping. You would have the galaxy return to the chaos of the ancient wars, every species armed to the teeth, trusting no one, ready to attack at any moment. I'd have the galaxy survive long enough to figure out better laws. Laws that protect people without making them weak. Laws that recognize that peace is only possible when people can defend themselves." Southeron considered the implications. Humanity's philosophy was dangerous. It challenged the fundamental assumptions that galactic civilization was built on. But it also contained a truth that the Council had been avoiding. Collective security only worked if the collective was actually capable of providing security. Against the Devourers, it wasn't. If I grant humanity the authority to lead galactic defense, if I suspend the technology accords temporarily, what guarantee do I have that this power won't be abused? Walter smiled sadly. None, you have no guarantee. You just have to trust that we'll do the right thing. Same trust we had to give the Council 50 years ago when you told us to destroy our fleet. We trusted you and you failed us. Now you have to trust us. It's not fair, but that's how it works. The old man moved closer, looking up at the massive dragon judge. High Arbiter, I've been fighting for humanity my entire adult life. I fought the Devourers when I was 27. I've spent 50 years preparing to fight them again. I'm tired. I want to rest. But I can't because no one else seems willing to do what needs to be done. And what needs to be done? You need to make the hardest decision of your 3,000 years. You need to choose between perfect justice and imperfect survival, between your principles and everyone's future, between who you've always been and who circumstances require you to become. Saltheron closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the ruins of his homeworld after the ancient war. He saw the few thousand survivors of his species, huddled in underground shelters waiting to see if they would live to see another day. He saw the price of principles when survival was at stake. When he opened his eyes again, they had changed color to gold. The shade of transformation and fundamental change. I need to reconvene the Council, he said. The Council chamber filled with nervous energy. Representatives arrived in clusters, speaking in hushed voices about rumors that had spread through diplomatic channels. Everyone knew something fundamental had changed. Saltheron had called for an emergency session with less than 4 hours' notice, unprecedented in Council history. The last time such a summons had been issued was during the Cascade collapse, when 3 star systems simultaneously suffered stellar failures. Saltheron took his position at the judgment seat, his scales still showing the gold color of transformation. Around him, representatives settled into their floating chairs, arranged in the traditional circles. Patricia Cole sat with the human delegation, but Walter Hayes stood in the center of the chamber again, his battered briefcase at his feet. Advocate 7 was the first to speak once order was established. High Arbiter, we have heard disturbing reports about humanity's secret military development. The Hive Collective demands immediate clarification and action. You will have both, Saltheron replied. His voice carried an edge that made several representatives lean back in their seats. Walter Hayes spoke the truth. Humanity has been developing prohibited technology for 50 years. They have hidden a fleet of 15,000 warships throughout their solar system. They have manufactured weapons that violate multiple clauses of the Sacred Technology Accords. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages, creating a chaos of sound that would have been deafening to unprotected ears. Saltheron let them vent for exactly 1 minute, then raised a single claw. The gesture brought immediate silence. Walter Hayes also spoke the truth about the Devourers. They are returning in force. Council analysts have confirmed fleet movements consistent with an invasion force of at least 3,000 primary bioships. They will arrive in 23 months. This time the silence was absolute. No one shouted. No one protested. They simply stared at Saltheron in horror, processing the implications of his words. The representative from the Gentle Walkers found her voice first. 3,000. High Arbiter. Our entire military consists of 15,000 ships, many of them exploratory vessels. Against Devourers we would last days, Saltheron finished. Perhaps a week if we are fortunate. The Devourers are not raiders or pirates. They are a force of extinction. The last time they came in such numbers, galactic civilization nearly ceased to exist. A representative from the Deep Dwellers, a species that lived in underwater cities on their homeworld, spoke in a gurgling voice that translation systems rendered as precise and analytical. Then we must evacuate, abandon the rim territories, consolidate our population in core systems, prepare for a siege that may last centuries. And go where? Walter asked, speaking without permission. Several representatives glared at him, but no one called for his removal. The Devourers don't stop at borders. They don't negotiate. They consume. If you run, they'll follow. If you hide, they'll find you. The only way to survive is to fight. Then we will fight, Advocate 7 said, her mandibles clicking with determination. The Council will mobilize every available ship. We will prepare defensive positions. You will die, Walter interrupted. All of you. Bravely, probably. With honor, definitely. But you'll still die. Because your military isn't designed for this kind of war. The crystalline collective representative chimed in, her patterns flickering with confusion. How can you be certain? You are one species, barely a century into space travel. What makes you think you understand warfare better than civilizations millions of years old? Walter looked at her directly. Because we fought them before and won. Because we spent 50 years studying how to kill them. Because humanity has one thing most of you lost millions of years ago. And what is that? Saltheron asked, though he thought he knew the answer. Recent experience with extinction. We know what it's like to face an enemy that wants to erase us from existence. We know what it takes to survive when survival seems impossible. You've had peace for so long that you've forgotten how to fight for your lives. The truth of that statement hung in the air like an accusation. The Galactic Council had indeed enjoyed millions of years of relative peace. Their conflicts were disputes over trade routes or territorial boundaries. Their military existed primarily to maintain order, not to wage existential war. The last beings who remembered fighting the Devourers were either dead or, like Saltheron, had spent millennia trying to forget. What do you propose? The Deep Dweller representative asked. That we simply hand over command of galactic defense to a species that has systematically violated our laws. Not exactly, Walter said. He activated a display from his briefcase showing a strategic overview of the galaxy. I propose a temporary military alliance. Humanity provides tactical expertise, advanced weapons, and our ghost fleet. The Council provides resources, logistics support, and access to your defensive infrastructure. We work together following a unified command structure. Under human leadership, Advocate 7 stated flatly. Under leadership that knows how to fight Devourers. Walter corrected. If one of your species has combat experience against them and can demonstrate effective tactics, I'll happily defer to their judgment. But I'm guessing none of you do. Saltheron knew he was right. The ancient species like the Flamekeepers had survivors from the last war, but they were like him, individuals who had spent millions of years in civilian roles. They remembered the horror of war, but not the practical details of waging it. The younger species had never experienced major combat at all. This is unacceptable, the Gentle Walker representative said. The sacred technology accords exist to prevent exactly this situation. One species with overwhelming military power, dictating terms to others. We cannot simply abandon millions of years of law because of a threat that may not even materialize. May not materialize. Walter's voice went cold. Lady, I've shown you sensor data. I've provided you with fleet composition analysis. I've given you arrival timelines. What more do you need? Would you like them to start eating your colonies before you believe they're real? We need time to verify, to investigate through proper channels. You have 23 months before they arrive. Less, if they accelerate further. You want to spend that time investigating? Go ahead. Just don't expect humanity to save you when you finally figure out we were right. The representative from the Silicon Collective, who had remained silent until now, chimed in a complex pattern that suggested deep thought. Perhaps we are asking the wrong questions. Instead of debating whether to accept human assistance, we should ask what alternatives exist. High Arbiter, what are our chances of survival without human military assets? Saltheron had been waiting for this question. Council Military Command estimates a 12% chance of victory using only conventional forces and approved tactics. With humanity's ghost fleet and weapons, chances increase to 43%. Still less than half, the Gentle Walker noted. But more than a tenth, the Crystalline Collective countered. That is the difference between probable extinction and possible survival. Advocate 7 stood, her entire body rigid with what looked like anger. This entire situation is the result of human deception. They hid their military for 50 years. They broke every promise they made to the Council. And now we're supposed to reward that behavior by giving them control of our defense? You're supposed to make a choice, Walter said. Pride or survival. Your law or your lives. You can punish humanity after the war. If there's anyone left to punish. Right now you need to decide whether you want to fight with the weapons that might actually work. Saltheron rose from his judgment seat, spreading his wings in a gesture that commanded attention. I have made a decision. It is not the decision I thought I would make when this trial began. It is not the decision my 3,000 years of experience suggests is correct, but it is the only decision that offers us hope. He turned to face the assembled representatives. Humanity is guilty of every charge brought against them. They violated the sacred technology accords repeatedly and systematically. They deceived council inspectors. They manufactured prohibited weapons. They built an unauthorized military fleet. Under normal circumstances, the penalty would be severe and immediate. Patricia Cole closed her eyes, waiting for the verdict that would doom her species. But these are not normal circumstances, Saltheron continued. We face an existential threat that our current laws and military structures are inadequate to address. We need capabilities that the technology accords prohibit. We need experience that only humanity possesses. We need weapons we have spent millions of years refusing to build. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle before speaking them. Therefore, I am exercising emergency authority granted to high arbiters in times of galactic crisis. I am suspending the sacred technology accords for a period of 10 standard years. Humanity is granted protectorate independent status, with full authority to develop, manufacture, and deploy any weapons technology deemed necessary for defense against the devourer threat. The chamber exploded into chaos again. Representatives shouted protests, demands, threats. Some declared they would withdraw from the council entirely. Others called for Saltheron's removal from office. The noise was deafening. Saltheron's scales turned bright red, the color of ultimate authority. His voice, when he spoke again, was amplified to override every other sound. Furthermore, humanity will assume command of all military operations related to the Devourer invasion. Council forces will integrate with the Ghost Fleet under a unified command structure. Species that refuse to comply will be on their own when the Devourers arrive. You cannot do this, Advocate 7 said, her voice shaking with fury. You are one judge. You cannot overturn millions of years of law by yourself. I am a flamekeeper who has lived through the last Devourer invasion, Saltheron replied. I have authority in these matters that supersedes normal council procedures. My decision stands. Then you are no longer fit to serve as High Arbiter, Advocate 7 declared. The Hive Collective calls for your immediate removal and the reversal of this illegal verdict. Noted, Saltheron said calmly. You may file your grievance with the Council Oversight Committee. They will review it after we have survived the next 23 months. Or they won't, because we'll all be dead and your objection won't matter. He turned to Walter. You wanted authority to prepare galactic defense. You have it. I suggest you use the time wisely. Walter nodded slowly. For the first time since entering the chamber, he looked uncertain. High Arbiter, are you sure about this? Once you give us this authority, there's no taking it back without a fight. You're gambling everything on humans doing the right thing. I am gambling everything on survival, Saltheron replied. Everything else is secondary. 6 months after the verdict that shook galactic civilization, Saltheron traveled to Earth's solar system for the first time. He had postponed the visit, busy with managing the political fallout from his decision. 17 species had filed formal complaints. 4 had threatened to leave the council entirely. 3 had actually followed through, withdrawing their representatives and closing their borders. The Hive Collective had attempted to organize a vote of no confidence against him, which failed by a narrow margin. But 30 species had reluctantly agreed to integrate their military forces with humanity's command structure. And 12 species, after reviewing the evidence about the Devourers, had quietly begun developing their own prohibited weapons. The sacred technology accords were already dead in practice, even if they remained law on paper. The ship that carried Saltheron through the outer solar system was a human design, faster and more efficient than council vessels. His escort was a young human officer named Rachel, who spoke with the clipped precision of military training. She explained that they were heading to a facility known as Neptune Station, one of the Ghost Fleet's primary coordination centers. As they approached, Saltheron saw what humanity had built in secret. The station was massive, larger than most council space cities. Ships docked at dozens of bays, being loaded with weapons and supplies. Construction scaffolding surrounded partially completed vessels. And everywhere humans worked with the focused intensity of people preparing for war. Walter Hayes met him at the airlock. The old man looked even more tired than he had 6 months ago, but there was an energy in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Purpose, Sal Theron realized. Walter had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. "Welcome to Neptune Station, High Arbiter," Walter said. "I'd give you the full tour, but we've got a strategic briefing in 20 minutes. I thought you'd want to see what you authorized." They moved through corridors filled with humans of every age and background. Some wore military uniforms covered in insignia that designated ship assignments and combat roles. Others dressed in civilian clothes, engineers and scientists working alongside soldiers. The atmosphere was professional but tense, everyone aware of the countdown running in the background. The briefing room was large enough to accommodate Sal Theron's bulk, which he appreciated. Human facilities weren't usually built for beings his size. A holographic display dominated the center of the room, showing a real-time map of the galaxy with the approaching Devourer fleet marked in red. Other humans were already present. Rachel introduced them as the command staff responsible for coordinating galactic defense. Admiral Richard Chen, a man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. General Patricia Morrison, younger but with the same focused intensity. Dr. Samuel Lee, civilian but carrying himself with the confidence of someone essential to the operation. And others, a dozen key personnel who would lead the fight. "High Arbiter, thank you for coming," Admiral Chen began. "I know you've been dealing with political backlash from your decision. We appreciate your support." "I am not here for thanks," Sal Theron replied. "I am here to assess whether I made the right choice. Show me what humanity has prepared." The display changed to show fleet deployments. Human ships were positioned throughout the galaxy, concentrated at 3 strategic choke points where the Devourers would have to pass. Council forces had been integrated into the formations, their ships mixed with human vessels in combined units. "We've divided the defense into 3 task forces," Patricia Morrison explained. "Each one includes roughly 5,000 human ships and 2,000 council vessels. We've prioritized training over the past 6 months, running joint exercises to get everyone used to working together." "How did the council species respond to human command?" Walter answered that question with a wry smile. "Mixed reactions. Some species adapted well. The crystalline collective took to military discipline like they were born for it. The gentle walkers struggled at first but came around when they realized we weren't planning to abuse our authority. The Hive Collective refuses to participate directly but has provided logistical support." "And the weapons?" Sal Theron asked. "What prohibited technology are you deploying?" Dr. Lee stepped forward, activating a new display. It showed weapon systems that made Sal Theron's scales darken with concern. Singularity torpedoes, just as he had seen in Walter's historical footage. Plasma lances that could cut through any known shield. Kinetic weapons accelerated to relativistic speeds. And something new, labeled as null field generators. "What are those?" Sal Theron pointed at the last item. "That's our surprise for the Devourers," Lee said. "During the First War, we noticed that their bioships use a form of quantum coherence to coordinate their movements. They're not individual organisms, but nodes in a distributed network. If you disrupt that coherence, they become confused and vulnerable. How do you disrupt quantum coherence across multiple ships? Very carefully, and with weapons that violate about 9 different sections of the technology accords." Lee pulled up technical specifications that Sal Theron didn't fully understand. "Basically, we generate a field that forces quantum states to collapse in random patterns. Anything relying on quantum effects for coordination gets scrambled." "Does it work?" "We've run simulations based on data from the first battle. The math says it should work. We'll find out for certain when the Devourers arrive." Sal Theron studied the deployment plans, the weapon specifications, the training schedules. Everything was methodical and well organized. Humanity had taken 50 years of secret preparation and transformed it into a coherent military strategy. They had integrated council forces without diminishing their capabilities. They had developed new weapons while maintaining old ones. They had done exactly what they promised. But doubt remained. "Walter Hayes, may I speak with you privately?" Sal Theron asked. They left the briefing room and moved to an observation deck that looked out over the shipyard. Hundreds of vessels were visible, ranging from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts. All of them bore the insignia of the United Defense Initiative, humanity's secretive military organization. "You have concerns," Walter stated, not asking. "I have many concerns. Chief among them is what happens after the war. If we win, if you win, Sal Theron agreed. You will have the largest military force in the galaxy. You will have weapons that no other species possesses. You will have proven that the sacred technology accords were wrong. What stops you from deciding that humanity should rule instead of the Council? Walter was quiet for a long moment, watching ships move through space. Honestly, nothing stops us except our own choice. You're right to be concerned. We have the power to do a lot of damage if we wanted to. That is not a reassuring answer. I'm not trying to reassure you, High Arbiter. I'm trying to be honest. Walter turned to face him. Here's the thing about humans. We're not saints. We're not perfectly noble. We break rules when we think the rules are stupid. We lie when we think the truth is dangerous. We build weapons because we're scared of what might kill us. Again, not reassuring. But, Walter continued, we also built all this to protect people. Not just humans, everyone. When we found out the Devourers were coming back, we could have kept quiet. We could have prepared to evacuate Earth and leave the rest of the galaxy to its fate. Instead, I walked into that trial chamber and told you the truth, knowing it would expose everything we'd built. Sal Theron considered this. You endangered your own species to warn others. That suggests altruism, or enlightened self-interest. If the Devourers destroy galactic civilization, Earth doesn't stay safe for long. We're all in this together whether we like it or not. Walter pointed at the ships outside. Every one of those vessels is crewed by people who know they might not survive the coming battle. They volunteered anyway, not because they're soldiers, but because they're people who don't want to see entire species go extinct. Noble sentiment. But after the war, when survival is no longer at stake, what guides humanity's choices? Same thing that always has. Fear, ambition, compassion, greed. We're complicated, High Arbiter. We don't have simple answers. Walter leaned against the observation window. But I'll tell you what I think. I think most humans just want to live their lives in peace. We don't want to conquer the galaxy. We just want to make sure no one can conquer us. And the minority who do want power, will have to deal with them same way you deal with dangerous individuals in your species. Laws, consequences, social pressure. Human civilization isn't perfect, but we've gotten pretty good at containing our worst impulses, most of the time. Sal Theron extended one massive claw, placing it gently on Walter's shoulder. The gesture would have terrified most humans, but Walter didn't flinch. I am 3,000 years old. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have watched species destroy themselves through pride, fear, or simple incompetence. Do you know what I learned in all that time? What? That there are no perfect choices. Only choices that lead to survival or extinction. I chose survival. Whatever comes after, we will deal with together. 2 weeks before the Devourers arrived, Sal Theron made one final visit to the Neptune station. The facility bustled with last-minute preparations. Ships that had been under construction were now operational, adding to the defensive fleet. Personnel who had been training were now in combat-ready positions. The entire galaxy held its breath. Walter met him again, but this time he wasn't alone. Patricia Cole stood beside him, along with Admiral Chen and the other members of the command staff. They all looked exhausted, running on willpower and stimulants. The fleet is ready, Admiral Chen reported. All 3 task forces are in position. Council species have completed integration training. Weapons are loaded and tested. We're as prepared as we're going to get. Morale? Sal Theron asked. Patricia answered. Mixed. Everyone knows this is existential. Some are terrified. Some are grimly determined. Some have achieved a kind of calm acceptance. But they'll all fight when the time comes. And humanity? How does your species face the possibility of extinction? Walter smiled, but there was no humor in it. Same way we always have. With stubbornness and bad jokes. Someone painted "Not Today" on the side of a dreadnought. Another crew named their ship, Humanity Says Hello. We cope through defiance. The Devourers arrived on schedule, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the galaxy's rim. Their fleet was everything the sensor data had predicted and worse. 3,000 primary bioships, each one pulsing with organic technology that defied analysis. Hundreds of thousands of support organisms ranging in size from fighters to cruisers. They moved with predatory grace, accelerating toward the nearest inhabited systems. The first task force engaged them at the edge of Council space. The battle lasted 6 hours and was broadcast across every inhabited world in the galaxy. People watched as human ships and Council vessels fought in perfect coordination, Using tactics that combined human aggression with alien precision, they watched as weapons that violated every law were deployed without hesitation. They watched as the null field generators activated, disrupting Devourer coordination and turning their organized fleet into chaos. They watched as humanity and the Council forces won, not easily, not without losses. Hundreds of ships were destroyed on both sides. Thousands died in those 6 hours. But when the Devourers finally retreated, leaving wreckage floating in space, the defensive line held. The second and third battles followed over the next week. Each time the Devourers adapted to humanity's tactics. Each time humanity adapted faster. The null field generators were countered with distributed command structures. Humanity responded with focused singularity weapons that targeted individual bioships. The Devourers deployed new organisms designed to kamikaze into defensive positions. Humanity used rapid deployment minefields that materialized from folded space. By the end of the second week, the Devourer fleet had been reduced to 1,500 primary bioships. The Human Council Alliance had lost 8,000 vessels. It was brutal, costly, and the most violent conflict the galaxy had seen in millions of years. But they were winning. On day 17, the Devourers broke off their assault and withdrew toward the galactic edge. Long-range sensors tracked them fleeing into deep space, abandoning their invasion. Humanity had done what the ancient galactic civilizations could barely achieve. They had not just survived the Devourers, they had driven them away. 3 months after the last battle, the Galactic Council convened again. The chamber looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. Representatives who had protested Saltheron's verdict now sat in respectful silence. Species that had threatened to withdraw had sent formal apologies. Even Advocate 7 looked subdued, her mandibles still but her eyes thoughtful. Saltheron stood at his judgment seat, scales showing a complex pattern of colors that reflected his emotional state. Pride, sadness, relief, concern, all mixed together in ways that only Flamekeepers could perceive. "The emergency period is concluded," he announced. "The Devourer threat has been neutralized for now. The question before this council is what comes next. Do we return to the sacred technology accords? Do we permanently revise our approach to military development? Do we trust humanity to voluntarily reduce their fleet?" Walter Hayes stood in the center of the chamber one last time. He looked older than when this had all started, worn down by the stress of coordinating galactic defense. But he was smiling. "High Arbiter, members of the council, I want to go home. I'm 77 years old. I'm tired. I fought 2 wars against the same enemy, and I really don't want to fight a third." He looked around the chamber. "Humanity will downsize our fleet to levels comparable with other species. We'll share our weapons technology with anyone who wants it. We'll work within whatever new laws you create, as long as those laws make sense." "And if we disagree about what makes sense?" the Gentle Walker representative asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than accusation. "Then we'll argue about it like civilized beings. We'll compromise when we can and agree to disagree when we can't. We'll probably break some rules and apologize later. But we won't threaten you, we won't try to dominate you, and we won't abandon you if something like the Devourers comes back." Saltheron felt something he hadn't experienced in his 3,000 years. Hope mixed with uncertainty. The galaxy was changing in ways that couldn't be controlled or predicted. The old certainties were gone, replaced by something messy and complicated and very human. "Walter Hayes," Saltheron said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I thank you for your service in defending our civilization. Humanity's violations of the sacred technology accords are officially pardoned. Your species is granted full membership in the Council, with all rights and responsibilities that entails." Walter nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He saluted, a crisp military gesture that meant nothing to most species present but everything to the humans watching across the galaxy. "Thank you, High Arbiter, for having the courage to make an impossible choice, for trusting us when you had no reason to, and for reminding everyone that laws are made to serve life, not the other way around." Years later, after Walter Hayes had finally retired to live his remaining years in peace, after the new technology treaties had been negotiated and signed, after humanity had indeed reduced their military to agreed-upon levels, Saltheron visited Earth one final time. He found Walter in a small house near the ocean, sitting on a porch and watching waves crash against the shore. The old man was 91 now, his hair completely white, his body frail from age. But his eyes were still sharp when Saltheron settled beside him. Hi, Arbiter, Walter greeted him. Bit far from home, aren't you? I wanted to see how you were doing, and to ask you something that has bothered me since the trial. Ask away. Did you always know I would rule in humanity's favor? Was exposing the Ghost Fleet part of some calculated strategy? Walter laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. No, I had no idea what you'd do. I walked into that chamber thinking there was maybe a 20% chance you'd listen. I was fully prepared for you to throw humanity back to the Stone Age, legally speaking. Then why did you do it? Because someone had to. Because keeping secrets wasn't going to save anyone. Because I'm old and tired of being scared. Walter looked out at the ocean. And because I figured if a dragon judge who'd lived 3,000 years couldn't see past his own laws to what mattered, then maybe galactic civilization deserved to fall. That is a harsh judgment. I'm a harsh old man. But I was right, wasn't I? You did see past the laws. You made the hard choice. Saltheron nodded slowly. I did, and I have spent every day since wondering if it was the right one. Was it? We survived. Everyone survived. By that measure alone, it was right. Walter smiled. That's all we can ever ask for, High Arbiter. To survive another day and hope we do better tomorrow. They sat in silence for a while, watching Earth's sun set over the water. An ancient dragon judge and an old human soldier, both tired from long lives, both satisfied that they had done what needed to be done. The galaxy continued spinning around them, complex and messy and alive, saved by an impossible verdict delivered by someone brave enough to change.